Really appreciate you guys. Appreciate everybody for supporting my content, everybody who has subscribed to the channel. Some new developments in the Nancy Guthrie case. This is new information that I'm going to share with you guys that I just received a little while ago from a source very close to the investigation that has to do with the ransom notes, the second ransom note in particular. Remember the ones that went to the local TV stations in Tucson, Arizona. And I want to read you this exactly because I wrote down exactly what I was able to get from my source. I am told that the second ransom note in the Nancy Guthrie case said that she died and that she was, quote, buried with nature now. And again, this is according to a source close to the investigation. The note indicated that Nancy's death was not intentional, but did not offer a direct apology. So remember, there was the first ransom note that went to the local TV station that was described as a ransom note. Then there was this second ransom note, which is what I'm talking about right now, which you'll remember we had the news director from that TV station on News Nation who said, well, I wouldn't categorize the second ransom note as a ransom note. She said the first ransom note she would categorize as a ransom note, but she would not call the second note a ransom note. And this explains why now. Again, I'm going to read it to you again. According to my source, the second ransom note in the Nancy Guthrie case said she died and was buried with nature now, and that the death was not intentional, but did not offer a direct apology. There's been some other reporting today from other people saying that it was an apology. I am told it was not a direct apology, but that it did indicate that the death was not intentional. Again, this is the second ransom note. Remember, we don't know whether any of these ransom notes are real. Savannah Guthrie has said in the past that she believes that the ransom notes, or at least some of them, are real. And it's interesting. I want to play for you the video that Savannah released on Instagram right after this second ransom note arrived. This one that I am now reporting said that Nancy Guthrie died and was buried with nature now. And it kind of makes sense when you now go back and watch what Savannah said on Instagram after receiving that note. Take a look at this.
We received your message and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay.
It's just so heartbreaking as more of these sort of puzzle pieces come together. You remember that video, you think back to what Savannah Guthrie was going through, and sort of put into perspective now the fact that I can report that that second ransom note did say that Nancy Guthrie died and that she was with nature now. Let me make sure I get that quote right, that she was buried with nature now. So that's my latest reporting on the notes. That's what I've been able to confirm. I know there's been a lot of other reporting out there today, and I don't know what's true and what's not, but that is something that I can verify myself, that I've confirmed with my source close to the investigation, who I trust, and you guys know how seriously I take information that I put out. So I talked with my buddy, retired FBI agent Steve Moore, about the latest with the notes. You know, he's still skeptical about whether all of these notes are even real. And by the way, TMZ has been reporting that the notes that they received did not say that Nancy Guthrie died. Now, I don't believe they received the same notes that went to the local TV stations, but it's sort of hard to, sorry, there's a big truck going by. Hard to pin down what note is what. But I want to play for you my conversation with Steve Moore. All right, Steve, how you doing? Nice to see you. Thank you for hopping on with me kind of at the last second. And everybody knows Steve by now who watches my show. If anybody's wondering what happened, you had like a power saw. You have like a little injury here, but was it a power saw?
Yeah, I was cutting up some wood in the backyard, and somehow I hit something in the wood and it just popped and got me in the nose and got me right here, but missed the eye. So all in all, it's a win-win.
Well, thank goodness. Yeah, and it's
Thank-
barely even noticeable. So hopefully you'll
Good.
be healed up quickly. I wanted to ask you about these new revelations, or maybe incorrect revelations, coming out about the ransom notes. There's this writer, Howard Bloom, who has characterized one of the ransom notes in the Guthrie case as an apology. Now, I've been careful never to say that. What are you sort of reading in between the lines here? I mean, how are you making sense of this?
Well, I'm taking everything that we get post note, the reactions of the Guthrie family, what law enforcement does afterwards, things like that, and trying to come to grips with what might be happening. It's kind of like I may not see everything that's in my backyard right now, but if the dog is barking, I'm guessing there's an animal back there. In the same way, um, when they get these notes, the way they respond, the police don't seem excited about what they've learned. They're not changing assignments, bringing people in, letting people go, and the Guthries are not um, publicly saying, yes, we're relieved to see this, and please tell her that we love her, and all this kind of stuff. Nothing in the responses uh, convinced me in any way, shape, or form that either they had proof of life, or that the kidnappers or the criminals who had her or alleged to have had her uh, had any kind of conciliatory tone in their message. I didn't pick anything like that up, because a conciliatory message in one of these notes leads to a huge amount of relief and some trust built up between uh, the horrible people who took the person and the people who want that person back. And it's kind of like the Stockholm syndrome.
Mm.
If they treat you well in these notes and give hope, I mean, that a good uh, kidnapper will be stern and in control, but give hope. These clowns did none of that. They destroyed hope and replaced it with false bravado, because I don't believe they had anything to trade by that point. So any kind of information that there was an apology, I think that's going to be kind of a non-starter with me.
Would it be unusual for a kidnapper to apologize? I mean, has that ever happened before?
I have not heard a kidnapper apologize except pre-sentencing. Um, I am not saying that it doesn't happen, because um, somebody takes a person and holds them for ransom. Uh, Sometimes they realize the gravity of what they've done, and they still don't want to get caught, but they certainly don't want to hurt the person. And sometimes they negligently, or in a fit of rage, do hurt the person, and remorse shows up. But again, these are not, I mean, technically they're professional kidnappers, but they're first timers.
So an apology would be unusual.
I would say an apology would be extremely unusual. And, anything like that puts a different take on the kidnapper itself.
So, with my busy travel and work schedule, it can be tough to stay consistent with my routine and feel confident that I'm getting the quality sleep that I need. And I used to struggle with turning my brain off at night and truly winding down after a long day. And that all changed when I started using
Behavioral scientists writing or taking down every single thing that's said, whether the person misspells this letter or that letter, whether their lines go up or down, if it's a handwritten note or something like that. They go through all these things and start to create a psychological profile, much the same as a psychiatrist meeting with a patient is going to try to figure out what they're dealing with. And if you had somebody who was suddenly showing remorse or a conciliatory tone, that would have changed the FBI's view of the whole negotiation, if there was a negotiation.
After the one note, Steve, that was described to me as not a ransom note, Savannah Guthrie made another video message, and you might remember it. It's when she said, "We received your message and understand." And she sounded kind of like sympathetic a little bit when she said that. "We received your message and understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so we can celebrate with her. This is very valuable to us and we will pay." Um, again, TMZ is saying that there was never an acknowledgement that Nancy Guthrie was dead in the notes, but that when Savannah said that, it did make me wonder what was in the note to make her say that.
And it's, one day when we get to see that note, when it's public in court or something like that, we'll understand completely and say, "Oh, yeah, I get that." But I think something doesn't have to be said verbatim in a kidnapping note for it to be obvious either to the victims themselves, the victim family themselves, or the FBI. The FBI's seen a bunch of ransom notes. They've seen all the ransom notes, and they can, through their institutional knowledge, even call in people like you're asking me questions about what does it say to you at this point? Have you had anybody make a conciliatory or an apologetic message? The FBI has all these things filed out with different kidnapping situations. And you can call an office, you can call Cleveland, for instance, hypothetically, and say, "Hey, let us talk to the agent who had the conciliatory kidnapper who felt very guilty and bad. We want to see how you worked with them." So the FBI has all these possibilities. And so nothing's going to ultimately be too big a surprise. Excuse me. So I think whatever was in that note convinced either the FBI or the Guthrie family that they were no longer, regardless of what the note said, in a situation where they were playing for the return of a live, unharmed victim.
And she said, "We will pay" at the end of that message. Why do you think they didn't pay?
Uh, there could be a bunch of reasons. That said, I'm going to tell you what I suspect. If I was running the kidnapping, and I did, they probably wouldn't want to put me in charge of a kidnapping. But if I was running it, one thing I would not do is voluntarily or at least eagerly advocate for paying ransom when no proof of life has been given. It is just, number one, it goes beyond the kidnapping you're working now. It's kind of like giving in to terrorists. Terrorists say, we've got these hostages. We want our prisoners released. Well, if that works, you're going to get more hostages taken. And so you don't want to set a precedent. In kidnapping, if you pay without proof of life, you might potentially not lodge. I think it's a very bad indicator that you would get the person alive if they're not willing to provide proof of life. That's number one. But number two, down the line, people who you don't even know and who don't know that they will ever have to deal with the FBI as family victims of a kidnapper, you've just reduced their chances of getting their person back alive. Because at that point, all you have to do is take the person out of the house, kill them, bury them, and get the money and run.
Mm.
So I wouldn't have paid.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say the sort of the rationale for the FBI not wanting to pay, and it makes sense, especially with your analogy about like terrorists, then you just encourage it in the future. Oh, people will pay for ransoms.
If you are watching this for the first time and you want to stay informed on cases like this one, cases that the mainstream media often rushes past before the full truth is known, then take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Dav. This channel exists to dig deeper, to stay longer, and to make sure that victims like Nancy Guthrie are never forgotten. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Nancy Guthrie was born and raised in a family that valued hard work, quiet dignity, and unconditional love. She married Charles Guthrie, and together they built a family that would later produce one of the most prominent journalists in the United States. Nancy and Charles had children, and among them was Savannah Guthrie, who would go on to become the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the longest-running and most-watched morning programs in American television history. But before Savannah became a household name, before the bright studio lights and the live broadcasts and the interviews with presidents, there was a tragedy that reshaped the Guthrie family forever. Charles Guthrie died of a heart attack when Savannah was still a teenager. Nancy was left to raise her children largely on her own, and she did. She held that family together through grief and financial uncertainty and the relentless demands of everyday life. She became the center of gravity around which her children organized their worlds. She was not just their mother. She was their foundation. As Savannah's career grew, first as a local news reporter, then as a White House correspondent, then as the face of morning television, Nancy remained in Tucson. She did not move to New York. She did not chase her daughter's spotlight. She stayed where she was comfortable, in the desert city she had called home, living quietly while her daughter became one of the most recognizable women in America. That contrast, the quiet private mother and the extraordinarily public daughter, is essential to understanding how this case unfolded, because the wealth and visibility associated with Savannah Guthrie's career made Nancy Guthrie, however unwillingly and however unfairly, a target. The details surrounding the precise moment of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance became a matter of urgent law enforcement attention. What is documented is that Nancy disappeared from the Tucson, Arizona area, and that the circumstances surrounding her absence raised immediate red flags for both local authorities and federal investigators. The case was not treated as a routine missing persons situation for long. The connection to Savannah Guthrie meant that resources were mobilized quickly, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation became involved in the investigation. The FBI brought with them the full weight of the Bureau's kidnapping and ransom response infrastructure, behavioral analysts trained to read the psychology of criminals through every word they commit to paper, forensic specialists capable of extracting identity from the most mundane physical details, and negotiation experts who had spent careers navigating the terrible space between the families of victims and the people who held their lives for profit. Tucson, Arizona is a city that sits at the edge of the Sonoran Desert, one of the most expansive and unforgiving wilderness environments in North America. The landscape there is vast and ancient, filled with saguaro cacti that stand like sentinels over dry riverbeds and rocky mountain ranges that stretch to the horizon. It is a place of extraordinary beauty. It is also a place where evidence can disappear, where the land swallows secrets, and where the distance between a paved road and true wilderness can be measured in steps rather than miles. That geography would become deeply relevant to what came next. The first ransom note did not arrive at the Guthrie family home. It did not come through any of the private channels that a sophisticated criminal would use to communicate with a family of means. Instead, it was delivered to a local television station in Tucson, Arizona. And that decision, to route a ransom demand through a media organization rather than directly to the victim's family, immediately told experienced investigators something important about the person or people behind it. Retired FBI Special Agent Steve Moore, a veteran of the Bureau with extensive experience in kidnapping and violent crime cases, has been publicly vocal about the significance of this choice. A professional kidnapper, someone who understood the mechanics of extortion, who had thought through the risks and the responses, would not send a ransom note to a television station. They would find a direct line to the family. The decision to use a news organization as an intermediary suggested either a profound lack of operational sophistication, an extraordinary appetite for public attention, or both. The first note was described by those who received it as a ransom demand. It sought payment in Bitcoin, the decentralized cryptocurrency that had become the preferred currency of criminals seeking to obscure financial transactions behind the shield of blockchain anonymity. The specific amount demanded was reported to be in the range of several $1 million, a figure calibrated to the perceived wealth of the Guthrie family. For Savannah Guthrie and her family, the arrival of that first note was simultaneously terrifying and strangely hopeful. If someone was demanding a ransom, it meant, or at least suggested, that her mother was still alive. It meant there was something to negotiate, something to exchange, a transaction that could be completed, a deal that could be struck. Hope, desperate and fragile, had something to hold on to. The FBI, however, immediately focused on a critical absence. There was no proof of life. In the world of kidnapping investigation, proof of life is not a formality. It is the single most important variable in determining how to respond to a ransom demand. Proof of life means a photograph taken after the disappearance, a voice recording that references a recent event, a handwritten message, something, anything, that establishes beyond reasonable doubt that the victim is alive and in the custody of the person making the demand. Without it, a ransom payment is not a rescue. It is simply a transfer of money into the hands of someone who may have nothing left to offer in return. The perpetrator in the Nancy Guthrie case never provided proof of life. Despite demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin, despite maintaining what appeared to be ongoing communication through notes sent to television stations, and eventually to other media organizations, the person or persons behind the correspondence never offered a single verifiable piece of evidence that Nancy Guthrie was alive. For the FBI, this absence carried a terrible statistical weight. Experienced investigators know that a kidnapper who holds a living victim has every strategic incentive to demonstrate that fact. Proof of life is leverage. It is the commodity being sold. A kidnapper who refuses to provide it is either dangerously disorganized, strategically incompetent, or, and this is the conclusion that no family wants to hear, no longer in possession of a living person. The FBI's response to the ransom demand, as is standard protocol, was measured. Payment was not authorized. Negotiations, if they occurred, were not public. And behind closed doors, in conference rooms and squad bays that the Guthrie family was not permitted to see, analysts and profilers began to piece together a picture of who they were dealing with and what had most likely happened to Nancy Guthrie. Savannah Guthrie found herself in an almost impossible position. As a journalist with decades of experience, she understood how institutions work, how investigations are conducted, how the FBI's protocols are designed to protect not just her mother but future victims of future crimes. She understood, intellectually, why the Bureau was cautious. She understood the argument that paying a ransom without proof of life sets a precedent that endangers lives beyond this single case. But understanding something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are two entirely different things. Nancy Guthrie was not a case file. She was not a precedent. She was a mother. She was the woman who had raised Savannah through the loss of a father, who had been the constant presence in a family that had already known grief. And Savannah had the financial resources to pay the demanded amount. The money, in her calculus, was irrelevant if it could bring her mother home. This tension between institutional wisdom and personal desperation, between the FBI's obligation to the abstract future and a daughter's obligation to her very concrete mother, became one of the defining emotional fault lines of the entire case. It is a tension that has no clean resolution, no verdict that leaves everyone satisfied. It is simply the brutal arithmetic of crisis. While the family waited, while the FBI worked, and while the investigation developed along channels that were not visible to the public, Savannah Guthrie took a step that was both deeply human and perhaps strategically intentional. She began communicating publicly. She used her platform, her social media presence, her access to cameras, to speak directly to whoever had taken her mother. The messages she posted were carefully worded, emotional without being reckless, pleading without being confrontational. They were the words of a woman, trying to build a bridge across an impossible distance, trying to connect with someone whose face she had never seen and whose name she did not know. She expressed her family's love for Nancy. She expressed their willingness to cooperate. She made clear that her mother mattered more than any other consideration. And then, the second ransom note arrived. This second communication was sent, like the first, to local television stations in Tucson. But its content was so different from the first that the news director of one of the receiving stations made a public statement drawing a clear distinction. She said she would categorize the first note as a ransom note. She would not categorize the second note as a ransom note. That statement, deliberate and precise from someone who had read the actual document, told the public that something fundamental had shifted. Investigative journalist Brian Entin, who had been reporting extensively on the Nancy Guthrie case through his platform on News Nation, obtained information from a source described as close to the investigation. What that source told him was specific, documented, and devastating. The second ransom note said that Nancy Guthrie had died. It said that she was buried with nature. It indicated that her death was not intentional, and it did not contain a direct apology. 4 sentences. 4 facts. And in those 4 sentences, the nature of the entire case changed. Buried with nature. Those 3 words carried within them a world of implication, a geography of grief, and a legal reality that the perpetrator may or may not have fully understood when they wrote them. In the context of Tucson, Arizona, a city bordered by desert wilderness that stretches in every direction for miles and miles, buried with nature was not a metaphor. It was a description. It was an acknowledgement that Nancy Guthrie's body had been placed somewhere in the landscape, somewhere in the vast and indifferent expanse of the American Southwest, left to become part of the terrain. The claim that her death was not intentional added another layer of terrible complexity. If taken at face value, it suggested that the kidnapping itself, the act of taking Nancy from her home, the demands for Bitcoin, the decision to use television stations as couriers, had not been designed as a murder. It suggested a crime that escalated beyond its original scope, a situation that spiraled out of the perpetrator's control, a death that resulted from neglect or accident, or a medical emergency that went unaddressed because addressing it would have meant revealing a crime. Whether any of this is true cannot be independently confirmed. It is what the perpetrator wrote. And everything that experienced investigators know about human behavior suggests that what criminals write in moments of partial confession reflects at least some version of their internal reality, even when filtered through self-interest and self-protection. The absence of a direct apology is also significant. Some reporting at the time suggested the note contained an apology. Entin's sourced reporting directly contradicted that characterization. Steve Moore, the retired FBI special agent, offered an assessment that aligned with the sourced reporting. A kidnapper apologizing in a ransom note would be extraordinarily unusual. An acknowledgement that death was unintentional is not the same as an apology, is a factual claim. The other is an emotional concession. The perpetrator was apparently willing to make the first, but not the second. After the second note arrived, Savannah Guthrie posted another video message to Instagram. And now, with the knowledge of what that second note actually contained, every word she said in that video takes on a dimension that was not fully visible at the time. She said, "We received your message, and we understand. We understand. Not we are horrified, or we demand answers, or we refuse to accept this. We understand." That word, understand, suggests an acknowledgement of information received, a processing of facts communicated. If the second note told her that Nancy was dead and buried with nature, then we understand, was Savannah telling the writer. We know what you are saying. We have processed what you have told us. We are not disputing it. She then said, "We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. Return our mother to us. Not tell us where she is being held or release her immediately. Return her." And the purpose stated was to celebrate with her, language that in the context of death suggests not a reunion with a living person, but the ability to gather as a family around remains, to hold a funeral, to mark a passing with the rituals that grief requires. She was asking, it appears, not for her mother's rescue, but for her mother's remains. And then she said, "This is very valuable to us, and we will pay." The ransom was still on the table. The family was still willing to pay, not for a life, it now seems, but for a location, for coordinates, for the ability to bring Nancy home in whatever form was possible. The money had shifted from leverage in a negotiation over a living person to the price of closure. The FBI, throughout all of this, was working a calculation that balanced multiple competing priorities. The recovery of Nancy's remains, if the second note was authentic, was one priority. The identification and prosecution of the perpetrator was another. The question of whether paying the Bitcoin ransom would advance either of those goals was central to every strategic decision. Steve Moore has spoken publicly about the Bitcoin dimension of the case in terms that are both analytically clear and emotionally sobering. Cryptocurrency is not perfectly anonymous. When Bitcoin moves, when it is transferred between wallets, when it is converted to traditional currency, when it is spent, it leaves traces that sophisticated forensic analysts can follow. The argument in favor of paying, from a purely investigative standpoint, was that it might create a trail to the perpetrator. The argument against was that it might simply result in the loss of several $1 million with no corresponding benefit. The FBI did not authorize payment. The ransom went unpaid, and the perpetrator, apparently concluding that no transaction was forthcoming, went silent. The notes stopped arriving at the Tucson television stations. The direct communication, such as it was, ceased, and the investigation moved into a different phase. One characterized not by the urgency of an active negotiation, but by the painstaking work of forensic analysis, geographic searching, and the slow accumulation of evidence that might eventually point to an identity. The TMZ dimension of the case added a layer of complication that investigators could have done without. The entertainment news organization, which operates through a network of contributors and sources across the country, became involved in the story early and remained deeply embedded in it throughout. They received their own communications, notes that they characterized differently from those sent to the Tucson television stations. Notes that they reported did not contain any acknowledgement of Nancy Guthrie's death. The discrepancy between what TMZ reported receiving and what Brian Entin's source described the Tucson station notes as containing raised serious questions. Were there multiple senders? Were some notes authentic and others fraudulent? Was TMZ receiving communications from the actual perpetrator, or from someone who had read about the case and decided to insert themselves into it? None of these questions had clean answers, and the ambiguity created by the competing accounts made the investigative picture significantly murkier. TMZ also made what can only be described as an extraordinary proposal to the FBI. The organization approached the Bureau with a request to pay the Bitcoin ransom themselves as part of a documentary they wanted to produce about the case, and asked whether the FBI would find such a payment helpful to the investigation. The FBI's initial response was described as interesting, which is the kind of careful, non-committal language that experienced federal agents use when they are declining something without wanting to close the door entirely. After that initial response, the FBI stopped returning TMZ's calls on this matter, a development that TMZ found puzzling, but that Steve Moore found entirely predictable. The concerns with involving a media organization in the operational mechanics of a kidnapping investigation are not difficult to articulate. Law enforcement depends on information control. The ability to keep certain details unknown to the public, and therefore unknown to the perpetrator, is often the difference between catching someone and watching them disappear. Partnering with an organization whose entire business model is built on rapid public disclosure is fundamentally incompatible with the requirements of a covert investigation. As the case extended without resolution, another phenomenon emerged that Steve Moore identified as common to all high-profile missing persons and kidnapping cases. The opportunists arrived. People who had no connection to Nancy Guthrie, no knowledge of her whereabouts, and no legitimate claim to offer, began reaching out with false tips, manufactured leads, and in some cases, fraudulent notes of their own. This is the dark gravity of public tragedy. It attracts not only genuine concern, but also exploitation. The agents working the case were forced to evaluate every incoming piece of information against the possibility that it was simply noise, a distraction engineered by someone seeking attention or money, or the strange notoriety that comes from inserting oneself into a famous tragedy. Steve Moore described this phenomenon with characteristic clarity. After the original perpetrators go silent, the secondary wave of predators and opportunists arrives, consuming whatever remaining possibility exists in the case like scavengers on an abandoned scene. Every false lead consumed resources. Every fraudulent note had to be authenticated or dismissed. Every claim of knowledge required investigation. And while investigators were occupied with the noise, the signal, the actual truth of what happened to Nancy Guthrie receded further into the distance. What the Nancy Guthrie case reveals, in aggregate, is a crime committed by someone who badly underestimated the forces they were setting in motion. The decision to use television stations as ransom note couriers, the failure to provide any proof of life, the communication breakdown that followed the second note, the apparent inability to execute even the second. Basic mechanics of an extortion scheme. All of it points to someone who believed they were executing a plan but was, in reality, improvising under pressure in ways that were both dangerous and self-defeating. The perpetrator apparently did not anticipate the full mobilization of federal investigative resources. They did not anticipate the public platform that Savannah Guthrie commanded and the pressure that platform could generate. They did not anticipate that sending notes to television stations would, rather than giving them control of the narrative, simply invite the participation of organizations and analysts and retired FBI agents who would spend months publicly dissecting their methods and their psychology. And if the second note is authentic, if Nancy Guthrie did in fact die while in someone's custody, and if that death was in fact unintentional, then the perpetrator was also managing the psychological weight of a death they did not plan for, navigating the criminal and moral consequences of a situation that had moved beyond anything they'd imagined when they made the initial decision to take her. That is the portrait of someone in over their head, someone frightened, disorganized, and capable of terrible harm precisely because they had no real plan for what came after. Nancy Guthrie deserves to be remembered as more than a case. She deserves to be remembered as a woman who raised her children through real hardship, who maintained her sense of self and her love of private life, even as her daughter became one of the most prominent journalists in the country, who built a community in Tucson, Arizona, and lived within it with grace and consistency for decades. She deserved a different ending to her story. She deserved the ordinary closing chapters of an ordinary life. Grandchildren, seasons, mornings in the desert, the long, slow peace of an earned old age. The investigation into her disappearance and death remains active. No arrest has been publicly announced. Her remains have not been publicly reported as recovered. The phrase "buried with nature" hangs over the case like an unresolved chord, suggestive, haunting, and so far unresolved. For the FBI agents who worked the case, the absence of resolution is a weight they will carry. Steve Moore, who has been retired for more than a decade, still wakes at 4 a.m. thinking about cases that did not end the way they should have. The agents who gave months of their professional lives to finding Nancy Guthrie will know that feeling. They will replay decisions, retrace paths, wonder whether a different choice at a different moment might have led to a different outcome. For Savannah Guthrie, the weight is of an entirely different order. She knows what the second note said. She has known for some time. She processed that knowledge in public, in an Instagram video, with the composure that decades of live television produce, and the grief that no amount of professional training can suppress. She said, "We understand," to a person who told her that her mother was gone, and she still offered to pay. Because closure, however terrible, is worth something. Because bringing someone home, even in death, matters. The case of Nancy Guthrie is not over. The desert holds its secrets, but deserts are not permanent. Evidence surfaces. Investigations develop. People make mistakes. And those mistakes eventually find their way to the light. What is owed to Nancy Guthrie? What is owed to every victim who disappears into the American wilderness, while the world moves on to the next story, is continued attention, continued pressure. The refusal to let a case go cold simply because it is uncomfortable or complex or slow to resolve. That is what True Crime Dav exists to do. To stay in the room when others have left. To keep asking questions when the news cycle has moved on. To make sure that the people at the center of these stories, the real human beings whose lives were taken or shattered or irrevocably changed, are never reduced to background noise. If this video mattered to you, if Nancy Guthrie's story moved you, if you believe that she and every victim like her deserves continued attention, then please like this video right now and subscribe to True Crime Dav. Every subscription tells the algorithm that these stories matter. Every like keeps this channel in front of people who might otherwise never hear Nancy's name. Your support is not passive. It is an active decision to say that the truth matters, that victims matter, and that the people who take them should never feel safe in their silence. Nancy Guthrie was a mother, a daughter, a grandmother, and a woman who spent her life holding others together. She was buried with nature. She has not yet been brought home, but she has not been forgotten. And as long as this channel exists, she never will be. Dedicated to Nancy Guthrie and to every family still waiting for answers.